Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Michelle Boardman, the Director of Social Marketing for the TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Here at the TA Network, we are getting ready for National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day, as I know you are as well. We designed today's webinar to support your efforts around Awareness Day and to help you get media attention for your activities. The tips and tools presented today will be of use for Awareness Day and beyond. The media landscape is always evolving, and so our skills to interact with reporters and bloggers must change as well. Hopefully you'll get your questions answered today and be able to devise a plan to shine the media spotlight on your Awareness Day activities. We like these sessions to be interactive, and we encourage comments, questions, and insights. Please use your chat box on the screen to engage with us. And below the chat box, you'll see a spot to download the slides for today's presentation. As a follow-up, you will receive a link to the recording of today's webinar and an invitation to join the TA Network's social marketing learning community. At the end of the webinar is a link to a very brief survey, and we would appreciate your time in responding as we take your feedback seriously and use it to improve these sessions. Today's speakers are both from Vanguard Communications, a firm focused on leveraging the power of public relations for social change. Shannon Walsh is the project director for Vanguard's work on National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day, and is focused on maximizing social impact and influencing behavior. Sangeetha Sarma is Vanguard's media lead. Her strength is in conceptualizing and implementing strategic media plans. You are in terrific hands with the two of them, and I look forward to learning along with you. Sangeetha and Shannon, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. So as Michelle mentioned, today's webinar is really going to be focused on media outreach at the local and community level and how to best support your Awareness Day activities leading up to Awareness Day and all throughout the month of May. So the learning objectives for today's webinar are to increase knowledge about media relations strategies to promote local Awareness Day messages and events, to identify ways to incorporate data into message development for effective media outreach, and to increase understanding of the news cycle and how this relates to making a compelling pitch. So Sangeetha is going to go through some tangible ways later on in the webinar about how to best increase your knowledge of media outreach and to be able to implement it successfully in your communities. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about SAMHSA's Awareness Day event. So of course, as most of you know, National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day really focuses on activities all throughout the month of May. And SAMHSA is hosting their Awareness Day event on Monday, May 6th, really as a launch for everything that the communities and local level system of cares are doing around Awareness Day throughout the month. So it'll take place on Monday, May 6th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern in Washington, D.C. at the HHS Humphrey Building, Great Hall, so in downtown D.C. There's a live webcast link that you can watch the live webcast and tune in to the event at 3 p.m. Eastern and to be able to interact with what's happening during the event and to watch live, as well as be able to watch an archived version that will be recorded later on. We will also be able to have each of you engage with the discussion via social media using the hashtag Heroes of Hope. And then SAMHSA's Awareness Day website is a really great resource for all kinds of tools and materials and guides to help you be able to successfully plan your own events, as well as to be able to continue to engage in SAMHSA's event on May 6th. the event theme for this year is on suicide prevention strategies that work. So really focusing on evidence-based practices and programs around suicide prevention at the national level, as well as highlighting some of the community efforts around suicide prevention. So we know a lot of you sometimes focus on the same theme that SAMHSA is working on for the year, but we also know that a lot of you choose your own themes based on really priority areas of what's happening in your community. So Sangeeta is going to talk a little bit and keep it a little bit more broad in terms of types of focus areas and themes that you might be working on for Awareness Day. But of course, there's opportunity to join the conversation around suicide prevention because that's what SAMHSA's event on May 6th will be focused on. So the event format for this year is including suicide prevention experts and senior government officials to share evidence-based practices. So really focusing on what SAMHSA and HHS is doing as an agency, as well as what other federal agencies are doing to support suicide prevention efforts on the national level, and then really including suicide prevention experts on the community and local level that are working to kind of bring change in this area and really supporting youth and young adults and their families and decreasing suicide within the community. A young adult and family member will discuss the importance of suicide prevention in communities and really talk about their experience and also be able to highlight some of the work that they're doing around suicide prevention. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, SAMHSA and HHS will live webcast and archive the event for additional learning opportunities. So not only is there the opportunity to watch on Monday, May 6th and to tune in live, but to also use the archive version for learning opportunities within your system of care or to use some of those pieces even in conducting some of your media outreach and so forth. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sangeeta, who's going to be talking about media outreach to promote Awareness Day and to give some helpful tools for your own media outreach within the community and local level.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Hi, everyone. I'm Sangeeta. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. I'm excited to share some of the media relations tips and strategies that I've learned over the years, and I hope you find some of it helpful. So I guess the first question is, why media relations? Why add sort of something else to your plate? And one of the reasons that it's great to try and get media attention to your Awareness Day event or activity is, it adds credibility and it sets you up as an expert. Just think through, if you're reading something in your local newspaper, if you're reading something in the news about an organization, you're almost sort of predisposed to trust it based on the story. You think of them, you think of the spokespeople as an expert, and sort of opening that door once allows you to continue to establish yourself as an expert. So this is one of the really good reasons to undertake a little bit of media relations activities around Awareness Day. And there is a little bit of a time commitment involved because it doesn't require a little bit of research into what are some of the outlets covering these topics in your community, who are some of the reporters, how do you write a pitch, and how do you make those follow-up calls and coordinate those interviews. But it's well worth it, and it is a very low-cost way to get your message across. And depending on some of the outlets, for example, if you're going for an op-ed opportunity, it allows you to control the message to a large extent as well. So the first thing sort of that we think about as we undertake media outreach is, what are those stories? What are those stories that we want to share with reporters or newsletters or organizations in the community? What do you want people to know about mental health? What do you want people to know about the program? What do you want people to know about your Awareness Day activities? And the one thing to do is, reach out to local young adults and family members in your community who have a connection to mental health and who are willing to share their personal story. That last part is very important because you want to make sure that if you're positioning someone to share their story, that they are completely on board and comfortable sharing their story. think through beyond the person who has a personal connection, what are some of the other spokespeople who can provide different perspectives? Are there expert perspectives from a mental health provider standpoint? Is there someone there that you can tap if a reporter wants to speak with a mental health provider? Are there caregivers that you know that can share their experiences and give their advice on situations? Are there any community members like teachers or school counselors or social workers who can really add that depth and richness to the story? And reporters, think through sort of any story that you read, you always hear from different angles. The story just has more depth and richness when you're hearing from different perspectives instead of just one person. So think through, what are some of the different people and data that you would want to see in a story about Awareness Day, about your Awareness Day activity. And we do realize that it can be a little bit challenging sometimes to get that human interest story, to get that spokesperson. So the other way that you can undertake media relations activities is to tell the story of your event or the activity that you're undertaking. You can talk to reporters about the topic of discussion at your town hall or health fair. You can talk to reporters about your community event and who they can expect to meet over there. So it's not just really constrained to a person. You can certainly expand it to really tell the story of your event and tell reporters, who can they meet and what kind of stories can they hear at this event. The other thing to think about as you are thinking through, your Awareness Day media relations activities is, compile that media list. This is very important to do early on because then it saves you a lot of time on the back end. And what we mean by media list is just, a listing of reporters or publications that are important to you, that reach your audience, and that cover these issues. One of the things, that's happening in newsrooms everywhere is they're getting smaller. You don't have a lot of reporters anymore in newsrooms, and they're all covering a lot of things, and they don't have as many resources. So they get a lot of different pitches, and you want to make sure that whatever you're sending them is something that is of use to them, which is why compiling that very focused media list is very, very important on the front end. It ensures that whoever you're reaching out to is the right person that you're reaching out to. As you're thinking about, what are those top local and regional publications that are important to you, the next step is to think through, who are the reporters from those outlets that are covering mental health issues? Who are the reporters who are covering this? And when it comes to newspapers, always, when you see the titles of people, try to pitch a reporter instead of a senior editor, because a reporter will likely be more receptive to your message and to your pitch than an editor who is managing a lot of different people and the overall newsroom and stories. The one exception to this rule is TV. Where it's definitely better with a TV station to, one, pick up the phone and call their assignment desk. That's the desk that is in charge of sending out all of the TV crews and making those reporter assignments for stories. So that's sort of the exception to the rule where you're really pitching an editor, an assignment editor, or a producer of a show instead of a specific reporter. And the other thing to do, to make sure that the reporters you're pitching are interested in the story is follow them on Twitter, see what they're tweeting about. What I like to do is I compile a Twitter list because a lot of the times reporters will put out a call to action on Twitter and say, hey, I'm looking for an expert on this issue. DM me, my DMs are open, or email me and write me, letting me know if you have a spokesperson. So you won't really know that unless you're following these reporters on Twitter. So that's an easy way of seeing, what are the stories they're talking about? Are they health stories? And what are they looking for? And when you're doing this, don't feel like you have to reach every single person. Start small. Think through, are there like 5 or 10 places in your community that you want to reach that you have the time to reach, because you have to think about your capacity as well. And then, when you're starting small, that also gives you the time and the capacity to do some research into what that specific reporter is covering, so that you can customize your email or your call to them. And you're also then showing them that you research what they write about, and there's a very specific reason why you're calling them. And reporters like that a lot. Once you have that list, you have to write a pitch. And what does that mean? A pitch is basically you making a case to the reporter, asking them to cover your story. It's like a sales pitch. You're trying to sell the reporter on your Awareness Day spokesperson or event or activity. Most reporters at this point, they do prefer emails. Sometimes if you're in a smaller market, feel free to pick up the phone because reporters generally in smaller markets are more amenable to picking up the phone and chatting through a story. For TV, it's always better to call. For radio, it's always better to call because you're trying to reach the news desk who makes all of these assignments, and they will likely ask you to send an email follow-up, but they always prefer a phone call first. So what are some of the big components that you need to make sure that your email or that your call really grabs someone's attention? You use a strong subject line, and I cannot stress enough how important this is because I've attended a lot of panel discussions with reporters from, top media outlets like the Post and the Times, and they get hundreds and thousands of pitches every single day in their email. And the one thing that I've heard consistently is we have less than 20 seconds to make our case, and most of them will decide if they're going to open an email by just looking at the subject line. So this is one of the key reasons why you have to make sure that your subject line is very, very specific, and it has a very clear so what, why does it matter to them. And it can't be just a very general, so-and-so celebrates Awareness Day. Like, that's not going to work as a subject line. So think through, why do you want the reporter to care, and use that as your subject line. It's basically the headline of a story, and a headline of a story is never general. So essentially, your subject line serves as the headline of a story. Reporters don't have a lot of time, so they like to read short pitches, no more than 2 or 3 short paragraphs. It needs to be to the point. Bullet out your ideas because bullets break up the text, and they really like that. It allows them to get the information very quickly. Think through some of the data that you want to strengthen your pitch. Are there any national trends that you're seeing that you can tell the reporter, we're seeing this trend play out nationally, and that is what we're facing in our community as well. Are there any regional trends that you're seeing that you can then mention to a reporter? Also make sure, that you don't use jargon in your pitch. And what we mean by that is, in our community, we're just used to a lot of terms that someone covering it as an outsider might not necessarily know. So your language needs to be very simple, very consumer-focused, because you're essentially giving the reporter the language to use for their story as well. So you don't want the reporter to go to a dictionary to find out what do they mean by this technical term. So don't use too many technical terms that only members of the community know. Look at what are some of the more commonly used terms or commonly used phrases to describe what you're trying to tell a reporter. One of the things, if you're having an Awareness Day activity that's going to have some nice visual components, it's going to have different booths and a lot of activity, make sure that you're playing up that visual aspect for all of your broadcast pitches because that's what TV crews are looking for. That's what news stations are looking for. They want to make sure that if they're going to take the time to send a reporter and a cameraman out to your activity, that they're going to get a lot of great visuals. And one of the things to do in that pitch is just to bullet out, at this event, you're going to see all of these things. Bullet out all these visual events that you'll be able to see. And the other thing that you can do is, you can use SAMHSA's National Awareness Day theme, or you can link your pitch to your local event or your local mental health trend. So don't feel like you have to use the same theme that SAMHSA is using. You're absolutely welcome to use something that you know will resonate in your community more because you're the expert there. So use your best judgment on, does this make sense to our community, or are we seeing different things play out here? And what kind of spokespeople do we have for the stories we're pitching? Because that's also going to play a huge role in what you're pitching. If you don't have the spokespeople for this great pitch that you have, then who is the reporter going to speak with? So these are a few of the things to think through as you're writing your pitch. And one of the things I like to do before I call, before I make any calls, is I like to practice a little bit out loud. A lot of the times you're going to reach someone's voicemail, and so make sure that you've got that little 30-second elevator speech that you can leave as a voicemail that gives them, a gist of what you're trying to tell them to cover, as well as your contact information. And if you get someone on the line, then think through, what is that first sentence that you're going to do to really draw them into your story. And beyond that first sentence, also if you're calling a reporter, please always ask them if they have a couple of minutes to talk before you launch into your pitch, because that generally makes them a little bit more amenable to staying on the phone, because they appreciate that you took the time to ask them if they had a moment to spare. A few things to consider as you're building that media list. Think through, certainly have your local newspapers on the list, your community newspapers. A lot of communities, my community certainly has some of those free newspapers that you'll see in the local grocery store and CVS and coffee shops. And a lot of people I know, me included, we read all of that news because it's one of the few places right now that gives you community news. Broadcast outlets, you have all of your local news stations, you've got your radio stations. Don't forget about podcasts. There are a lot of great podcasts out there, and if you know of any local people in your community who have their own podcasts, see if you can get their contact information and invite them to your activity, or ask if they want to do a podcast around your spokesperson. Blogs are still big, online outlets are still big, so think through, what are some of the big blogs that that your audience is reading, that people in your community who care about these issues are reading. And newsletters, don't only think about media as newspapers or broadcasts or blogs. Newsletters of trade associations are a great place to think about contributing your views to. And think about, when you're pitching some of the media, it's not just getting a reporter to write about a story. You can also, it's as simple as submitting an event to a calendar section of a newspaper or a blog. It's all you have to do, and those sections are pretty simple. Normally you either fill out an online form or you just send it to the calendar editor and they'll post it. So don't overlook the calendar sections, because a lot of people, if they're looking about, for activities to attend or interesting things to do, that's where they're going to find it. And if you have a spokesperson who has a very strong opinion, think about the opinion section of your newspaper. That's a great place to really, a place where you can control the message, and it's a place where you can showcase your expertise. So those are a few things to think through as you're thinking about outlets to pitch, the kinds of outlets to pitch, and what to pitch them. And normally, in a lot of these outlets, reporters are covering a range of stories. If it's a slightly bigger publication, you'll have reporters who are basically split into beats. So you'll have a reporter who focuses almost exclusively on mental health. You'll have someone who focuses on education. You'll have someone who focuses on community affairs, someone who focuses on family and parenting. This is true of slightly larger publications. In smaller publications, normally what you'll see is you'll have a general assignment reporter, and those reporters cover everything. They cover every kind of story, but even then you'll see that some general assignment reporters seem to cover a few more health stories. So try to get to those people, the ones who are covering more of those health stories, because they're the ones who already have some knowledge on the issue, they have some interest on the issue, and they're probably going to be more amenable to your pitch. Make sure, depending on the reporter beat that you're trying to pitch to, that you customize your pitch to make sure that it aligns with their beat. So if you are going to pitch a reporter who almost primarily focuses on education, you can talk about how mental health is important to those education outcomes. The same with family and parenting. You can talk about the support systems that are important to those outcomes. So just customize each pitch so that the reporter knows that you've done research on the issues that they cover, and that there is a very specific reason why you're reaching out to them. And then, don't forget the power of social media. Earned media, which is essentially what we refer to of asking reporters to cover your story, it's just one side of the equation. Engage with SAMHSA on social media through the entire month of May. Post your own social media messages, share any relevant videos and infographics that you may have. People love any kind of data that they can visualize. They love graphics. They always get shared more. They get more engagement. People love videos. Short videos, shorter is better. Make sure that you're using the hashtag Heroes of Hope so that if people have different sort of, people can just click on a hashtag and then they can see all the different conversations that are happening. And one of the things I like doing a lot, and I think it gives you a lot of reward, is it's not just a one-way street. Social media is really a place to have a conversation. And one of the ways to have that conversation is to talk to other organizations or businesses in your community or reporters in your community who are posting about public health or who are posting about issues that are related to mental health. And engage with them. You can retweet them and comment on that. Or you can say, hey, I saw you posted about this. Did you know this is coming up? Did you know why this is important? And you can do the same thing with national reporters too. If you're seeing something that they're covering that is so integral to your community as well, that you're seeing in your community, don't feel shy about reaching out to them and saying, hey, actually, we're seeing this play out in our community. Let us know if you want to chat more, or here's some information we'd like to share. It is a great place to have those conversations and to really amplify your reach and get a larger audience to think about your message and to get familiar with your message. And then the other thing, because a lot of our spokespeople, they could be, if your spokespeople are minors, especially when you're dealing with issues that affect children and youth and young adults, you just want to be very, very mindful of some of the privacy issues and some of their comfort level, especially if you are going to share their stories with media. One of the things is you want to make sure that you get permission from their parents or their caregivers. You want to ask them if you're going to be pitching children or youth, ask them, if they're willing to share their story and very specifically what parts of their story they're willing to share. One of the things I like to do is I like to get on the phone and I tell them to narrate their story to me based on what they'd like to share. And if there are any specific flags or any very personal details that they've shared as part of that conversation, then I'll follow up with them saying, you shared this. Are you willing to share this with a reporter? Are you willing to see this in print? Sometimes people, when they're talking on the phone and they say, we'll share anything, they don't realize that in this day and age, if something's online, it stays online forever. So it's our responsibility to make sure that they know that and to talk them through that. So that we're giving them all of the tools to make that decision. So just think about a few of those issues. Offer strategic story sharing resources with youth and families. You can find that on SAMHSA's website. And one of the things is, be honest with the reporters. Say this is what they're willing to talk about. This is what they're willing to do, and be prepared to negotiate. You are, your responsibility at this point is, it's to the children, it's to the people sharing their story. And yes, you want to be helpful to their reporter, but you also don't want to promise anything that makes people sharing their story uncomfortable. So just be prepared to negotiate. And I will say in my experience, reporters are very good about being mindful about what people are comfortable sharing and what they're not. Don't ever share with a reporter anything off the record that your source is not comfortable sharing. Don't say, hey, I know they're not comfortable sharing this and it's for this reason. If they're not comfortable sharing it, it shouldn't even be part of your pitch to a reporter. If a reporter finds out through someone else that this, and this is also part of this story, and then they ask you, that's when you go back to your source and say, hey, are you comfortable sharing this or no? And negotiate with the reporter saying, well, they're not, this is how they want to frame it, and this is what they're not willing to talk about. Don't feel pressured to say yes to the reporter. Don't feel pressured to accept or say yes to every single request that the reporter has. And the other thing to just remember with media outreach is before you conduct any sort of outreach, just to make sure that you've got every single thing that you need in case a reporter has follow-up questions. I've heard from reporters that one of their pet peeves is, if they get a pitch that they get really excited about and they want to cover the story and they're very interested in the spokespeople, and they'll get in touch with the person who pitched them and say, yes, I'd like to talk to these people. Can we coordinate an interview? And then they often find that either the person's out of town or they weren't quite aware and they didn't fully have permission yet to share that story. You're ruining that relationship now and for the future. And so it does both of you a disservice. So just make sure that before you even pitch the reporter, you've got everything you need. You have a spokesperson, you've got their availability, you have a list of topics that they can talk about. This way, if a reporter says immediately, yes, I love this idea, let's do it, you have everything you need to make this a success. And finally, make sure that you send the reporter a thank you note. And even if a reporter says they're not interested, I think it's always good practice to be like, thank you. And if in the future you ever need to speak to anyone on this issue, please consider us as a source. Because more often than not, I have had reporters get back in touch with me saying, hey, we couldn't chat on this story, but I remember you have an expert, and I'm working on a story now. And this will essentially help you get press for these issues throughout the year, and it's not just tied to 1 month of the year. So it helps you build these relationships, it helps you build a long-term relationship. It's not just a one-time, one-story only relationship. The kind of relationship you want with the reporter is really so that you become their expert source or you become their connector on all of these issues. So with that, I wanted to open the floor for questions. I'd love to hear some of your challenges that you've faced in the past, any tips that you want to share about how you overcame them, and anything that we can help you with, either with media outreach or if you have questions about Awareness Day in general. And you can also chat in your questions. So you can ask your questions over the phone, or you can also chat them in the chat box.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta and Shannon. That was wonderful. I just want to let everyone know if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box, or as Sangeeta said, you can unmute your phone and just talk to us. And I will get us started because I have a question. I was wondering, Sangeeta, if you could talk about how much follow-up should one do once you make your initial pitch? How much, follow-up phone calls? What's considered too assertive in this day and age? I've heard of people, showing up in a newsroom with homemade cookies or swag or, just anything to get in front of a reporter. How assertive should you or could you be?
That's a good question. I think probably not cookies, although I would welcome cookies every once in a while. I think what I like to, general rule of thumb that I follow is I will email first, because I know a lot of reporters do prefer email. I will email first, and then I normally will wait a day or a day and a half, and then I'll follow up with a phone call and send a follow-up email. And then I normally, depending on the urgency, if it's more of, if you want to invite someone to an event, closer to the event, maybe a day or two out, I'll make another round of calls and emails. So really, to me, rule of thumb is no more than 2 calls, and 3 email follow-ups is about the most that I would do. And I wouldn't do those follow-ups, consecutively, not like every single day, but give them a little bit of time to get through their email. But certainly do a few follow-ups, because I've run into this situation a lot of times where, the reporter didn't see the original email, but they saw my follow-up and they're like, oh, I missed this one, but yes, I'd like to cover it.
Great, thank you. What other kinds of questions do we have out there?
Miraculous coloring pages.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Oop, I'm not sure we heard that question.
And if you have Awareness Day plans, we'd love to hear what you're planning as well.
Yes, that's a great point. Both Michael Collado and I, he's on the call as well, are planning a series of stories about what's going on in the field for Awareness Day. And we're going to share them through the TA Telegram and through social media. So if you would like us to highlight your story, please get in touch with the two of us or share today.
And all of you can ask questions over your phone lines or your computer because we have unmuted the lines. So if you don't want to type in the chat box, you can just either speak into the speakers of your computer or over the phone and ask us questions directly.
Sangeeta, can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect for an outcome if we are pitching a story for Awareness Day? Have you heard anything about communities who have done that and what the outcome has been?
So I know in the past, sometimes communities do have success, especially if they're having an activity or event, of getting a local crew out to the event and getting sort of a small story or a reporter from the local newspaper comes out and will talk to a few people at the event. So those are some of the outcomes that we've heard, either a small news hit or a piece in the local publication. The other thing that we have had success in the past doing is really, with the youth or young adult stories, really reaching out to those local publications that they're a part of and getting them on their local stations or getting their stories on in their local newspapers or blogs. So those are some of the outcomes that we have heard that communities have accomplished in the past through media outreach, where they've had reporters cover them and they've had reporters talk about the importance of children's mental health and what a certain community is doing. We've also heard. On the social media side, we've had outcomes of people just engaging in that conversation and sharing their stories online. And I think every year we have a very robust sharing of conversations online across communities and partners, not only on Awareness Day, but really through the month of May. Shannon, is there anything else on social media as far as social media goes that you've seen?
Yeah, I would just add that particularly around social media, because the activities are happening all throughout the month of May, there's a lot of coverage that can happen after the event has already occurred. So definitely think about being proactive in your media outreach leading up to an event or an activity, but also don't hesitate if you have already put an event together and you want to send a recap of that event or some of the metrics for success that, and the stories of change and things like that have occurred, that's a really nice way to engage with the media as well, and to start that conversation now around the event and showing the success of it, and then start, kind of building that relationship for next year. And then you can be more proactive in leading up to the event and sort of doing some outreach prior to the event happening as well.
Michael, I saw you typed in a question. Do you have any tips for what kind of subject lines or framing of a pitch has worked in the past? Are there any general rules of thumb on how to lead your pitch? So as far as subject lines go, we've made them very, very specific and very sort of attention-grabbing. Like I know one time we had a youth leader who I think she was an immigrant from a war-torn country and was leading the way on mental health advocacy. So we could really frame the subject line of, youth mental health leader flees war violence to become top, to advocate for mental health community, to advocate for mental health and then we could add sort of insert name here, blank community. So really just putting up the most eye-catching or most newsworthy portion of that story right up front. If there's a youth who's like a 12-year-old who is helping a community with suicide prevention efforts, that's the subject line, like 12-year-old in our community helping prevent suicide. That is something that if I were a reporter, I'd be like, what is a 12-year-old doing and how are they doing it to help people in our community? As far as leading the pitch goes, I would say to the point. Think about essentially a news story, which is that inverted pyramid style where the most important piece of the pitch is right up top. You don't want to do any kind of slow reveal in a pitch because the reporter will likely not read a whole pitch to the end if they're not getting everything that they need right up front. So really the pitch needs to be like, this is a problem in our community, here's what we're doing, here's when we're doing it, and here's why this will help everyone here. And really just keeping it to those points and making sure that central, this is why it matters in our community, to people in our community portion is way up high, because that's what a local reporter is looking to hear. How is this going? Why is this important, and how is this going to change lives of the people in our community? And don't feel like you have to put too many specifics in your pitch. You don't have to put every single person that they can speak with, every single backstory. You don't need any of that. You just need those few bullet points, and then say, if you need to speak with a youth or a parent or caregiver, I can connect you, and just leave it at that.
Thank you, Sangeeta. We'll put out one last call. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I'd love to thank you both so much for a wonderful presentation. And if you would all hold on for just a minute, a survey is going to pop up for you to let us know if there is any additional webinars that we could provide for you that would be helpful. And we really appreciate your time today, and we wish you great success with all of your Awareness Day plans. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.